Governor Cuomo is again being criticized for not making enough of a commitment to environmental issues in his executive budget. As we discussed last week, there are groups that are pushing for more investment in renewable energy to fight climate change. But at the legislative budget hearing on environmental conservation, Peter Iwanowicz from Environmental Advocates of New York also testified that the state's just not doing enough to prepare for possible federal cuts or making sufficient investment in things like water infrastructure and also staffing at the DEC. Now he's joining me in the studio to explain a little bit more in depth. Thank you so much for being here.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Liz. Thanks for having me again.
You're like critic in chief. Well, we should also know you used to run the DEC, so you know from which you speak.
Yeah, and I've worked in the governor's office. I know things can get challenging, but at a time when we have such a crisis on our hands from federal officials proposing to really eviscerate the federal government's approach on environmental protection, denying that climate change is happening, you really need a response from New York that rises to that challenge.
So how much federal funding do we get, environmentally speaking, that's on the chopping block potentially?
Our analysis is potentially on the chopping block $270 million. That's a combination of clean water money that flows to our communities, as well as grants directly to our environmental agencies. Even the Department of Health gets grant monies from the federal EPA. So significant programs are at risk with federal cuts.
So, and also we know that, I mean, this is a little bit ancillary, but things can get as petty, reportedly, as a tiff between the president and the minority leader of the U.S. Senate, that's Chuck Schumer, over the Hudson Tunnel, right? So the president's like, I'm not happy with him because he's not backing my infrastructure plan, so I don't want you to fund it, even though I thought it was a good idea. So could be quite a bit of politics involved here. I mean, New York is taking it on the chin in the tax reform, for example, the tax reform law. So do you believe that we are getting disproportionately hurt by federal cuts?
Well, on the environment, certainly, because not only are we getting our budget cuts, we're also on the receiving end of the dirty air mass that's coming in from the Midwest. Administrator Pruitt, who runs our Federal Environmental Protection Agency, is turning a blind eye to cutting pollution from the Midwest, particularly climate change pollution. So yeah, we're impacted not only financially, but our health is impacted and our environment's impacted because of their approach. But listen, the president's going to be petty. But much like the governor has to work with the legislature here, Congress needs to really step up. And we have representatives on both sides of the aisle in New York representing us in Congress, and it's up to them to step up and tell the president, no, we're not going to stand for these cuts.
Do you see the current regional administrator, Pete Lopez, who's a former assemblyman from New York, as a champion? I mean, he did manage to get them to take a look at GE samples, for example, rather Hudson River samples of the GE pollution, right? And so that was something of a victory, if albeit a small one.
Sure. Is he going to be a champion? I don't think anybody can be a champion in this administration for the environment because, like I said earlier, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't believe in climate change. He's working to essentially eviscerate the agency from within, and they go along with these extreme budget cuts and implement them even before Congress has taken final action. So there's very little, I think, a regional administrator can do to buck headquarters or the president.
Similarly, I mean, $270 million, the governor could pony that up. It's not that much money, and arguably, you know, you could, the carbon tax could potentially, as we discussed last week, at least estimated generate $7 billion.
$7 billion, yeah.
So, you know, that would, a small chunk of that would be $270 million. And so he could certainly jigger things around even without the carbon tax and put that in there. But there are specific policy areas that he has not been terribly transparent about, like the plastic bag ban, for example, or even congestion pricing, which supposedly is going to get done, but we don't have any idea really how at this point.
And you're touching on a lot of the issues that we testified last week before the hearing on. Essentially, we don't really have a real congestion pricing plan. We would love to be full-throated supporters of what the governor is doing, but he hasn't come forward with anything. We would really love to support action on plastic bags. And again, the governor failed completely to put anything into his budget that addresses this problem of 23 billion bags that we use every year. So this is that moment in time where the rhetoric of being a leader is falling far short of where the reality is with our budget. And there's an opportunity not only for the governor, but legislators to come in the next 4 weeks in Albany and fix it.
Well, legislators are sort of, doing that. You reference Assemblyman Cahill and his proposal in your testimony, where he has sort of this hybrid ban fee bag approach that could generate resources that then you could invest subsequently in the environment. That's one possibility. Also, we spoke to Liz Krueger. She and Senator Hoylman, I believe it is, have a different variation. There's a bunch of them floating around. The thing is that the state put the kibosh on New York City's plan and then subsequently had this task force, and then the task force didn't make any significant recommendations, which really, so I guess what you're saying, if I hear you correctly, is the rhetoric is not matching up with the fine print. The governor's saying all the right things, but he's not putting behind it the muscle that necessarily needs to be there.
Absolutely. We fancy ourselves a climate leader, but we don't have all the policies in place to make us that climate leader. There's a lot of great ideas. And it may sound crazy to you, but it doesn't to me. But we're going to put a lot of stock in the legislative process. We've seen time and time again, a couple of years recently, the legislature come forward with an idea about clean water funding when the governor didn't want to do anything. 2 years ago, the legislature came forward and put into place purchase rebates for electric vehicles when the governor didn't want to do anything. And we're going to have to see that this year. Next week, when both the Assembly and the Senate propose their one-house budgets, we're going to see, are they responsive to a lot of the issues that environmentalists have laid down before them?
Well, and even the EPF, which supposedly was supposed to get fully funded, the governor said, with $300 million, but in the fine print of the financial plan, the money's not actually there.
Yeah, and we've seen that in years past, but the controller is out with a report this morning that looks at the Environmental Protection Fund, and he's raising the alarm, rightfully so, that over the long term, the EPF is going to need a new dedicated funding stream to make sure that it's not at the whims of the economy. And we agree with that approach and kind of testify to it.
So, okay, is there anything here? Let's just briefly touch on DEC staffing. And I also spoke recently with the DEC Rangers and also the Parks guys, and they're like, look, you're expanding, and that's fantastic, but you're bringing in all this acreage, and who the heck is going to manage it and keep it safe unless you bring us back up to levels that we haven't seen in quite some time?
Yeah, and I know that the commissioner said recently in Albany at a hearing that we're able to do more with less. Technology can help bridge the divide. I'm not a subscriber of you can do more with less. We need to augment our resources. We need more staff. We need more cops on the beat. We need more technical resources at the agency to ensure our mission is there. The folks that are there now are doing an amazing job, but the staffing lines have been held flat for a number of years. At a time when the economy was booming, we should have been investing more in our environmental agencies because it pays off not only economically with job creation, but it pays off in reducing healthcare costs as we all benefit from clean water and clean air.
So before I let you go then, is there anything, this is critical. I think you would agree, right? And you're asking the governor to step up and put his money where his mouth is, really. Is there anything positive that you can say, yes, he is actually meeting the mark? Well,
I guess at a time when you're looking at deficits and programs are being cut, the one sort of silver lining here is things didn't get cut from the environment when they could have. But at a time where we're facing such an environmental crisis, with our leaders in Washington not appreciating the value that New Yorkers place on the clean environment, this was that time for the moment for the governor really to rise above that and present a bigger, bolder vision and a more expansive vision for a cleaner environment. One that would have had climate goals enshrined into law, that would have examined hard the carbon tax, that could have really put in place a funding stream to make our communities more equitable and just, and provided a transition for workers out of the fossil fuel economy into clean energy. There's a lot of different pieces that could have been done that weren't. So a status quo budget isn't good enough for New York.
So are you getting a feeling from legislative leaders that you're going to get anything that you want?
Yes. I think they understand that this budget falls short. The Senate is telling us that they're not going to go for the governor's rollback of tax credits for brownfields and green buildings and electric chargers. We're likely to see something more comprehensive from the Assembly on plastic bags, on water infrastructure, and even congestion pricing. There's a huge moment in time that's available for the legislature to fill that void, and we're hearing that they're going to rise to the occasion and fill it.
Well, next week is the week, right? So we shall see.
Indeed.
I thank you so much. It's great to see you, Peter, as always.
Good to be back, Liz. Thanks.